Welcome, Steve Vallas, to Decential Media. I've got a few questions to ask you today. The first one is, what are your overall thoughts about Australia's regulatory approach throughout the year?
I'm remarkably optimistic about where we've ended up. I think a lot of the conversations that people have been worried about moving too slowly were largely a byproduct of the fact that we had a relatively new government that hadn't turned its attention to this subject matter. But I think we're getting to the point now where we're pretty clear on the direction that they're taking, and we can tell where we're likely to end up because there have been lots of consultations this year. So we're getting many, many more insights about the things that are of concern, the things that they think they want to regulate for. So I like where we're at this point in time.
Awesome. Okay, so you actually spent 2023, following you on LinkedIn was just like a map of the world. You were on the go. You do deserve a holiday. You spent 2023 really travelling throughout the world, various jurisdictions, doing research, having conversations. What was your biggest takeaway from all those trips?
Rochelle and I travel a lot. We've been visiting these jurisdictions and have recognised that in each jurisdiction, the running joke for us is the grass is always greener on the other side. And it's rarely grass, it's usually just concrete painted green. But from a distance, it looks wonderful. And each jurisdiction has its strengths and its weaknesses. The key takeaway for us is everyone's at a very different stage of their respective regulatory journey. Singapore, as an obvious leader in the region for us, has changed its tone to a degree. It's become more conservative in terms of the way it's being perceived. Blockchain, not crypto, as a narrative, seems to have taken hold significantly. That's compare and contrast to Hong Kong and what's happening there and their desire to really encourage businesses to consider Hong Kong as a place to set up. And then Australia then trying to find its place, one, in the region and also with respect to where we sort of see ourselves in a global setting as well. So everything has been bespoke. And part of the reason we've travelled so much is because we've recognised that you get a very insular view when you're trying to assess jurisdictions from afar. So we've made a point of going to those jurisdictions and speaking to a lot of people on the ground.
Was there any one jurisdiction that you thought there was something that Australia could really use?
I think, interestingly, where we think we can use and what we can use are two very different things. We see ourselves often as a mini UK. The legal system is familiar. So I think that direction is one that we tend to over-index on. And similarly, we look at the US and feel like we're in a similar conversation to where the US is. I don't think that's the case. So I think the reality is we should be looking much closer to home. And I think pursuing Singapore to a degree, recognising that Singaporeans will always move much more readily than we are. We like to pride ourselves on being a fast follower. We should probably work a little bit harder to be a fast follower. Singapore continues to get a disproportionate amount of attention for the region. And I think it's important for us to start paying attention to markets like Japan and South Korea because they're largely unknown to Australians. So it's being more engaged in the region and probably caring a little bit less about what's happening on either side of the world.
Thank you for that. So the prediction for next year is possibly we might come out of the bear market. Do you have any predictions about when that will happen and really what you'd like to see as an outcome of that for the benefit of the crypto ecosystem in 2024?
I think we'll come out of many of the bear market conditions that we've had, largely because people fundamentally chase incentives. And the reality at the moment is the business case for a lot of this technology, I think, is improving. I think back to the conversations I was having in 2017 and 2018, we were talking about efficiency as a driver. The tech wasn't ready. The tech's largely ready now. So I think that puts pressure at a traditional sort of business end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, price sensitivity and price movements tend to drive interest. So we're watching retail be re-energised because if numbers go up, people tend to disproportionately sort of ape in, pardon the use of the very familiar terms. And so I think those two things are very, very different conversations, but I think for the first time in a long time, it feels like they're both moving in the same general direction. Acronyms are plenty. Real-world assets tokenization is taking off, I think, in a lot of very mature TradFi conversations, and I think people are just revisiting their view of what cryptocurrency is, particularly given that the merging of the worlds through things like ETF discussions in the US makes it feel like it's not going anywhere. And so I think there's a convergence of these conversations. So I think it'll be a very interesting year for those in the space. And I think a lot of people will be forced, and forced is the word I'm choosing deliberately, to revisit views that they've held pretty firmly since 2017 and 18, 19 and 20. So I'm looking forward to people sort of revisiting some of their preconceived notions of what this space might or might not be.
And for you personally, professionally, what is 2024 shaping up for you to be?
It's funny, you mentioned that there was a lot of travel in 2023. The expectation is more travel, as in more than 2023, in 2024. I think the connected conversations have become very clear to people. When I talk to different sort of nations and different regulators in different jurisdictions, we all talk about education, and I think the key theme for us is coordination. And that's not interoperability, it's not a technical coordination, it's coordination in the kind of conversations people are having across borders. So that's going to be the theme that we're carrying forward. I think the plan already is Jan, Feb and March involve 3 different countries in a very short period of time. And then again, we travel to the rest of the world in April, May, June and July. So I expect that the LinkedIn feed at least will look like we're living a very interesting life. I think the circles under the eyes will suggest that it's probably not as much of fun as people would otherwise anticipate.
Oh, well, I look forward to sharing a beer with you in a couple of the destinations, I'm sure, next year. So that's perfect. That's all I need, Steve. Thank you so much. Let me just stop recording. Stay on the line and just make sure that it uploads.